The black gun trembled in the young man's hand as he pointed it directly at the little girl's father. 22-year-old eyes, wide with panic, finger dancing on the trigger. The fluorescent lights of Riverview subs buzzed overhead like angry insects, while 8-year-old Noelle pressed herself against her daddy's back. Her unicorn backpack the only splash of color in a room that had suddenly turned gray with fear. But Malik Brooks didn't raise his hands high. He raised them slow. What would you do in this moment? Your child behind you, a stranger's desperation aimed at your chest, everyone else in the room frozen in terror. Most people would panic. Most people would beg. Most people would do exactly what this 36-year-old single father refused to do. "Hey," Malik said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade through silk. 3 simple letters that somehow made the entire restaurant hold its breath. "It's okay. We hear you. Nobody's gonna make this worse." The words landed with the weight of absolute certainty. Not a plea. Not a threat. Just truth, delivered by a man who understood that survival wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It was about being the calmest. Behind the counter, Eli, the college cashier, fumbled with the register, his hands shaking so violently he couldn't hit the right buttons. The machine beeped angrily, rejecting his panicked attempts. Precious seconds ticked by. The young robber's breathing grew faster, more erratic. His grip tightened on the weapon. That's when something extraordinary happened. 20 feet away, Maya Leland, CEO of a $3 billion logistics company, a woman who commanded boardrooms and crushed quarterly projections, found herself completely still. Her designer navy blazer suddenly felt ridiculous. Her phone lay face down on the counter like a surrendered flag. For the first time in her adult life, all her money, all her power, all her influence meant absolutely nothing. She was just another human being watching a father protect his child with nothing but words and an inexplicable calm that defied every instinct screaming through the room. "Use both thumbs," Malik told the cashier, never taking his eyes off the gunman. His voice carried the patient authority of someone who'd solved this exact problem before. "Press cash advance override. It sticks sometimes." The robber's head snapped toward Malik. Here was this nobody in a worn flannel shirt, the kind of man Maya would normally never notice, giving instructions to help speed up his own robbery. The audacity should have been insulting. Instead, something in the young man's chest loosened just slightly. Malik knew registers because he'd worked retail. He knew panic because he'd seen it in war zones. He knew exactly how much danger everyone was in because unlike the screaming woman by the window or the executive hiding behind an overturned chair, Malik Brooks had learned to read the room when reading it wrong could get you killed. Have you ever seen someone stay this calm under pressure? Because what happened next will change how you think about courage forever. Eli pressed both thumbs to the screen. Once, twice. The register drawer shot open with a mechanical cough that echoed like a gunshot. Bills disappeared into a wrinkled backpack. 20s, 10s, the handful of 5s that represented some teenagers' weekend plans. The robber moved toward their table. Malik slid his phone across the scratched surface, then his wallet. Everything given freely, without resistance, without the drama that could turn desperation into violence. But when those shaking fingers reached toward Noelle's purple backpack, toward the little unicorn charm that caught the harsh restaurant lighting, something shifted in the young man's eyes. For just a moment, Maya saw him see what Malik had seen from the beginning. Not a target, not a transaction, but a child. Someone's daughter. Someone's entire world. The gun lowered an inch, maybe 2. Maya's CEO brain, trained to catalog risks and calculate outcomes, began processing what she was witnessing. This wasn't luck. This wasn't chance. The man in flannel was orchestrating their survival with the precision of a symphony conductor, reading every micro-expression, every nervous tick, every heartbeat of hesitation. Noelle's small hand found the seam of her father's jacket and pressed there, a trembling star seeking warmth. Malik felt that tiny pressure and something ancient activated in his chest. Not rage, not fear. Purpose. "Take it," he said softly when the robber grabbed his phone. "Take it all. There's nothing else you need here." The young man's eyes darted around the room, calculating, measuring, looking for the exit strategy that would get him out of this mess he'd stumbled into. But first, he needed wheels. keys?" he demanded, voice cracking on the single word. Maya watched Malik's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. This was the moment. The choice that would determine whether a father and daughter went home tonight or became another tragedy on the evening news. "We walked," Malik lied with the fluid ease of someone protecting what matters most. "Bus home, none of us drove." The lie hit like a perfect note in a discordant song. Simple, believable, effective. But Maya could see Malik's van keys right there in his front pocket, could see the Superman keychain Noelle had probably picked out herself. She realized she was watching a masterclass in sacrifice, a father willing to give up everything except the one thing that mattered: his daughter's safety. The robber hesitated, scanning faces for deception, finding only the quiet certainty of a man who'd already made his choice. This is the moment that changed everything. But you need to hear what happened next, because this single father's next move didn't just save lives, it transformed them. Let me know in the comments. What would you have done with those keys? The door chime that had welcomed them 30 minutes ago suddenly sounded like a countdown timer, marking seconds, until everything they thought they knew about courage, about justice, about the power of choosing mercy over vengeance, would be turned completely upside down. 30 minutes earlier, the same door chime that would soon announce terror had welcomed Maya Leland with its cheerful two-note song. She swept into Riverview Subs like she owned every square foot of real estate in downtown Kansas City, which, given her investment portfolio, wasn't entirely wrong. Her navy blazer was tailored to perfection, her heels clicked against linoleum with military precision, and her phone buzzed with the constant urgency of a $3 billion empire that never slept. Maya had exactly 47 minutes before her flight to Newark. 47 minutes to grab something that qualified as dinner, review the quarterly logistics reports, and mentally rehearse her presentation for tomorrow's board meeting. She'd chosen this place because it was close to the distribution center she'd toured, because the GPS said 4.2 stars, and because sometimes even tech moguls needed to remember what normal people ate for dinner. She ordered without looking up from her screen. Turkey and Swiss, no mayo, extra mustard, the way someone places an order who's never had to count the cost of condiments. That's when she noticed them. At a corner table sat a man in a flannel shirt that had seen better seasons, carefully cutting a sandwich in half with the methodical attention most people reserved for important documents. Across from him, a little girl with wild curls tied back with a yellow ribbon bounced in her seat, eyes wide with the kind of wonder Maya remembered feeling about ice cream trucks and snow days. Can you imagine saving for months just to give your child one special dinner? Drop a heart if you've ever made sacrifices like this for family, because that's exactly what Malik Brooks had done. 3 months of setting aside $20 here, $15 there. 3 months of passing on coffee shop visits, of choosing store-brand cereal, of making his lunch instead of buying it, all so he could bring Noelle somewhere that felt special on her 8th birthday. "This is where important people eat, right, Daddy?" Noelle had asked that morning, spinning in front of their bathroom mirror in her best yellow dress, the one with the small stain near the hem that Malik had scrubbed until his knuckles were raw. "The most important person I know is eating here tonight," he'd replied, fixing her ribbon with hands that could disassemble an engine but trembled slightly when braiding his daughter's hair. Malik managed inventory at the Northside Community Center, a building that served 3 neighborhoods with equal measures of hope and determination. Monday through Friday, he tracked supplies, coordinated deliveries, and made sure the after-school program had enough snacks to fuel 30 kids' homework sessions. Saturdays, he co-led the robotics club, where children took apart broken electronics and learned that most things could be fixed if you understood how they were supposed to work. It wasn't glamorous work. It didn't come with stock options or company cars or quarterly bonuses, but it was steady, honest, and it let him be home every night for bedtime stories and math homework that was getting harder than he remembered 3rd grade being. The single father thing hadn't been his plan. 3 years ago, his world had looked different. A wife who made him laugh until his stomach hurt, weekend trips to the zoo, bedtime routines that didn't require him to read voices for both the princess and the dragon. But Cancer doesn't negotiate with your plans, and Anna had slipped away on a Tuesday morning in March, while Noelle was at school learning about butterflies. Now it was just the two of them, figuring it out one day at a time. Maya glanced at their table again, noting the way they shared a single appetizer, how the man's jacket cuffs were frayed but clean, how the little girl's shoes were polished, despite being 2 sizes too big. Her first thought was dismissive. How quaint, how ordinary, the kind of automatic judgment that comes from living in boardrooms where the smallest decision moved millions. She returned to her phone, scrolling through emails about supply chain optimization and profit margin adjustments, problems that could be solved with the right algorithms and enough capital. She had no idea she was about to learn that some problems couldn't be solved with money. Meanwhile, across the city, in a basement apartment that smelled like instant ramen and broken dreams, a 22-year-old stared at an eviction notice dated 3 days ago. The paper trembled in hands that hadn't stopped shaking since he'd lost his second job this month. Night shift at a warehouse that decided restructuring was cheaper than paying benefits. His name was Marcus, though he'd stopped believing names mattered when the world decided his zip code was his resume. The GoFundMe page his cousin had set up, Help Marcus Stay in School, had raised exactly $63 in 2 months. $63 against a rent debt that had grown teeth and was now devouring everything he'd worked for. Upstairs, his grandmother Dolores prayed the same prayer she'd been whispering for months. Lord, send somebody. Send something. My baby's drowning, and I don't know how to throw him a rope. She'd raised Marcus since he was 7, after his mother decided addiction was easier than parenting. She'd worked double shifts at the hospital laundry, sent him to community college, believed in him when he stopped believing in himself. Now her knees hurt too much for extra shifts, her Social Security barely covered her medications, and her grandson was staring at choices no 22-year-old should have to make. Marcus looked at the small black handgun his cousin had left for protection, though protection from what had never been made clear. The weight felt wrong in his palm, like holding someone else's nightmare. He'd never wanted to be the kind of person who solved problems with violence. But hunger changes mathematics, and desperation makes philosophers out of kids who just wanted to fix cars and maybe take a girl to dinner without calculating the cost of appetizers. The bus fare to downtown would be his last $3. After that, every choice led into darkness. 3 people. 3 different worlds. 3 paths about to collide in a sandwich shop where the soda fountain was broken and the fluorescent lights buzzed like trapped insects. Maya finished her sandwich while reviewing quarterly projections, completely unaware that her understanding of strength was about to be completely redefined by a man whose monthly salary was less than she spent on a single business dinner. Malik helped Noelle with the last of her vegetables, promising barbecue chips as a reward, not knowing that in 15 minutes he'd be making promises to a stranger with a gun. Marcus checked the bus schedule one last time, whispering an apology to his grandmother's photograph, not knowing that Mercy was about to arrive, wearing a flannel shirt and carrying a father's love. The door chime sang its innocent song, marking time until everything changed. The moment Marcus stepped through that door, the entire atmosphere shifted like air pressure dropping before a storm. Maya felt it first, that primal recognition that predators understand about prey, the sudden awareness that safety was no longer guaranteed. Marcus moved with the jerky uncertainty of someone fighting their own conscience with every step. His gray hoodie hung loose over thin shoulders, hands buried deep in the front pocket where cold metal waited like a coiled snake. 3 customers looked up from their meals, Maya with her phone still glowing, Malik cutting his daughter's sandwich into perfect triangles, Noelle swinging her legs under the table while humming a song from school. "Excuse me," Marcus said to Eli behind the counter, voice barely above a whisper. Eli looked up from wiping down the soda fountain, the same broken machine that had disappointed 5 customers today. "Yeah, what can I?" That's when Marcus pulled out the gun. The transformation was instantaneous. Eli's face drained of color so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug. A woman near the window gasped and dropped her drink, ice cubes scattering across linoleum like marbles. The man by the door started to stand, then thought better of it and slowly lowered himself back into his seat. Maya's phone slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the counter with the finality of a gavel. Her quarterly report suddenly seemed as relevant as yesterday's weather. Every executive training session she'd ever attended, crisis management, hostile takeovers, damage control, none of it had prepared her for the reality of staring down the barrel of desperation. But across the room, something remarkable happened. While everyone else froze in various stages of panic, Malik Brooks calmly set down his knife and placed both hands flat on the table. No sudden movements, no theatrical gestures, just a man accepting a dangerous situation and choosing his response with the deliberation of someone who understood that panic was the enemy of everyone in this room. "Register," Marcus stammered, waving the gun toward Eli. "Open it. Now." Eli's hands shook so violently he could barely hit the right buttons. The machine beeped once, twice, then flashed an error message in harsh red letters. He tried again. Another error. His breathing became rapid, shallow gasps that fogged up his glasses. Marcus's own breathing matched Eli's panicked rhythm. The gun trembled in his grip like a leaf in a hurricane. Maya could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the restaurant's air conditioning. This wasn't a hardened criminal executing a planned heist. This was a kid who'd never held a gun before today, watching his desperate plan fall apart in real time. "I can't." "It won't." Ellie's voice cracked. That's when Malik spoke, his voice cutting through the rising tension like a blade through silk. "Use both thumbs. Press cash advance override. It sticks sometimes." The words landed with such casual authority that everyone, including Marcus, turned to stare at this man in flannel who was apparently giving technical support during his own robbery. Maya's CEO brain, trained to recognize leadership in crisis situations, began processing what she was witnessing. This wasn't random. Malik knew exactly what he was doing. Every word, every gesture, every micro-expression was calculated to keep everyone alive. This father lied to a gunman to protect not just his daughter, but everyone in that room. What would you have done? Tell me your honest thoughts below. Marcus's eyes locked onto Malik's face, searching for deception, for threat, for any reason to escalate. Instead, he found only patient competence, the same tone a teacher uses when helping a struggling student, the same steady confidence a paramedic brings to a car accident. Eli pressed both thumbs to the screen. The register drawer shot open with a mechanical wheeze that sounded like relief. Bills disappeared into Marcus's backpack, crumpled 20s, a stack of 10s, the collection of ones that represented tips earned by teenagers saving for college textbooks and first dates. Maya watched her own cash vanish and felt nothing. Money she'd never miss, gone to feed someone else's crisis. But then Marcus moved toward their table, and everything changed. Malik's phone slid across the scarred surface without resistance. His wallet followed. Old leather worn soft from years of use, probably containing more family photos than cash. But when Marcus's desperate gaze fell on Noelle's purple backpack with its rainbow unicorn charm, something shifted in the young man's expression. The unicorn was small, probably from a dollar store, the kind of cheap trinket that means everything to an 8-year-old and nothing to anyone else. But Marcus stared at it, like he was seeing his own childhood reflected in that plastic toy. Birthday parties he'd never had, toys his grandmother couldn't afford, the simple magic of being young enough to believe unicorns existed. His hand wavered. The gun dipped toward the floor. Maya held her breath, recognizing the moment when human connection trumped desperation. This wasn't just a robbery anymore. It was 3 broken people finding each other in the wreckage of their separate struggles. Noelle pressed closer to her father's back, her small fingers finding the worn fabric of his jacket. She didn't understand the danger, but she understood that Daddy's voice had changed, become gentler and more careful, the way he sounded when she had nightmares and needed reassurance that monsters weren't real. "Take it," Malik said softly. "Take it all. There's nothing else you need here." But Marcus wasn't done. His cousin had told him to get wheels, something fast that couldn't be traced back to him. His eyes swept the restaurant, calculating who looked like they drove something worth stealing. "Keys," he demanded, the word coming out like a prayer and a threat combined. Maya watched Malik's face, saw the almost imperceptible tightening around his eyes. She could see the Superman keychain in his front pocket, obviously chosen by Noel, probably his most treasured possession after his daughter herself. The van outside represented freedom, safety, the ability to take his child home where dangers came from homework assignments and bedtime negotiations, not from strangers with shaking hands and loaded weapons. We walked, Malik lied with the fluid ease of someone protecting what mattered most. Bus home. None of us drove. The lie was perfect in its simplicity, believable, untraceable, final. Maya realized she was witnessing something extraordinary, not just courage, but strategic thinking under pressure that would have impressed her most seasoned crisis managers. While everyone else had surrendered to fear, Malik was conducting a masterclass in de-escalation, reading Marcus's emotional state, anticipating his needs, and providing just enough cooperation to satisfy, without compromising anyone's safety. Leadership, she thought, watching this man in second-hand clothing outmaneuver a situation that would have broken most boardroom executives. This is what real leadership looks like when there's no script, no safety net, no room for error. Marcus studied Malik's face, searching for deception. He found only the quiet certainty of a man who'd already made his choice and accepted the consequences. 3 seconds passed. 5. 10. The gun swung away from Noel's direction. Marcus took a step backward, then another. His backpack hung open, bills visible like autumn leaves scattered by wind. He looked at each face in the room. Eli still shaking behind the register, Maya frozen in her business attire, Malik's steady gaze that somehow conveyed both vulnerability and unshakable strength. The door chime sang its innocent song as Marcus disappeared into the Kansas City night, leaving behind a room full of people who would never be the same. In the sudden silence that followed, Maya realized she had just witnessed something that would change not just her evening, but her entire understanding of what it meant to be strong. The police arrived 6 minutes after Marcus disappeared into the night. 6 minutes that stretched like hours while Eli sobbed behind the counter, while the woman by the window called her husband in breathless gasps, while Maya sat motionless in her designer blazer, trying to process what she'd just witnessed. Malik held Noelle against his chest, one hand smoothing her curls while she trembled like a bird against his heartbeat. She hadn't cried, not yet, but he could feel the shock settling into her small body, the way trauma finds children and changes them in ways parents spend lifetimes trying to heal. "Daddy? Why was that man so sad?" she whispered against his neck. The question hit harder than any gun ever could, because that's what she'd seen. Not a monster, not a criminal, but a young man whose sadness had curdled into something desperate and dangerous. Detective Rodriguez arrived with the calm efficiency of someone who'd processed 1,000 crime scenes. No flashing lights, no Hollywood drama, just clipboard questions and security footage that would tell the story better than any witness statement. "Can you walk me through what happened?" Rodriguez asked, settling across from Malik, with the patient attention of someone who knew that details mattered. Malik recounted the events without embellishment. Register malfunction, technical assistance, demands for keys, the lie that probably saved lives. His voice remained steady, factual, the same tone he used when explaining robotics concepts to 8-year-olds who thought coding was magic. Maya watched from her own interview table, noting how Malik refused to dramatize his role. No hero narrative, no claims of courage. Just a father who'd done what needed doing and wanted to take his daughter home. The security footage played on Rodriguez's tablet, grainy black and white that somehow missed the emotional weight of what had transpired. Maya could see herself frozen like a statue, could see Malik's measured movements, could see the moment Marcus hesitated at Noelle's unicorn charm. But the camera couldn't capture the electrical tension, the delicate dance of de-escalation, the way one man's composure had kept everyone alive. After statements were signed and business cards exchanged, Maya approached Malik as he helped Noelle into her purple coat. The little girl's eyes were heavy with exhaustion, the kind of bone-deep tiredness that comes after your nervous system has been flooded with adrenaline for an hour. "Excuse me," Maya said, her executive confidence feeling suddenly inappropriate in the presence of real courage. She pulled a business card from her purse. Thick cardstock, embossed logo, the kind of calling card that usually impressed people. "I'm Maya Leland. I wanted to give you this." Malik glanced at the card without reading it. "I appreciate the gesture, but tonight I'm just trying to get my daughter home." There was no dismissiveness in his tone, no judgment of her corporate world. Just priorities arranged in their proper order. Child first, everything else somewhere distant. Maya nodded, recognizing the wisdom and boundaries she'd never learned to draw. "Of course, if you ever want to talk, my number's on there." 3 days later, the security footage leaked. Someone at the police department, maybe a clerk, maybe a detective with bills to pay, sold the video to a local news station for $500 and 15 minutes of fame. The segment aired Tuesday night. Calm during chaos, father's cool head saves lives. The footage played in slow motion, highlighting Malik's steady movements, his protective positioning, the moment he helped the cashier open the register. The anchor used words like heroic and remarkable composure, while Malik's face remained pixelated for privacy. By Wednesday morning, the video had been shared 40,000 times. By Thursday, it was trending on 3 social media platforms with hashtags like Calm Dad and Everyday Hero. Malik ignored it all. He returned to the community center Thursday morning at his usual time, unlocked the supply closet, and began inventory on art supplies for the after-school program. When a reporter appeared at the front desk asking for the calm father from the robbery, Malik simply said, "I'm Malik. I need to open the gym," and walked away. The reporter followed him anyway, microphone extended like a weapon. "What was going through your mind when the gun was pointed at you?" Malik paused in the gymnasium doorway, considering the question with the same careful attention he gave everything else. "That my daughter is 8. That she likes honey mustard more than she admits. That I have to keep being her dad." The segment aired that night, and Maya watched from her Newark hotel room while reviewing quarterly projections that suddenly seemed less important than they had a week ago. She'd built her career on making complex problems simple, on translating chaos into dashboard metrics a CFO could understand. But watching Malik talk about honey mustard and fatherhood with the quiet dignity of someone who understood what actually mattered, that was an operating principle worth studying. She sent a text to the number she'd coaxed from her business card. "If you're open to a coffee, I'd value the conversation. No agenda. Just respect." They met the following Tuesday at a place that served both pour-overs and grilled cheese. Democracy in sandwich form. Maya wore jeans and the careful ease of someone trying to be less than her title. Malik wore a hoodie the color of storm clouds that hadn't decided their intentions. "I don't want to make this about my company," Maya said after ordering. "Every version I rehearse sounds like public relations or white saviorism or both. There's probably a version where I do nothing and avoid both risks. But it still feels wrong not to do something." "What something do you have in mind?" Malik asked, lifting his coffee with hands that had steadied during crisis and remained steady now. Maya exhaled, grateful for directness in a world that worshipped corporate speak. "We've been trying to build a second-chance hiring program, not charity. Necessity. We have more open positions than qualified people, and more communities locked out over past mistakes than any reasonable system should tolerate. Every time we gain traction, we stumble on practical questions. Transportation, childcare, background checks that make HR departments panic. We haven't succeeded because we haven't let someone who understands it from the inside design it." She met his eyes. "Would you consider helping us build it properly? I can pay. I don't expect free consultation." Malik considered this, thinking of the boys in his robotics club, their brilliant stubbornness, their quiet leadership that no one had licensed yet. He thought about dignity held and lost, about the young man whose desperation had brought them together. "What happens to him?" Malik asked. Maya frowned. "Who?" "The young man with the gun. What's his next chapter if he's caught?" Maya chose honesty. "Armed robbery charges. Depending on his record, he could face years in prison. I'm not a criminal attorney." "A crime victim asking for mercy for his attacker? Have you ever seen forgiveness like this?" "Share your thoughts. I'm reading every comment." Malik nodded slowly. I'll help you build what you're describing, but I want something in return. Name it. I want to meet his mother, or his grandmother, or whoever loves him when he's not a headline. I want to look them in the eye and tell them I want the system to offer rehabilitation instead of just punishment. I want to write a letter to the court asking for programs over prison cells, and I want your company to fund slots in that program for him and others like him. Not because of me, because it's the only version where everyone gets to go home and try again. Maya felt her chest tighten around a proposal that rearranged everything she thought she knew about justice and mercy. Across town, in a basement apartment that smelled of fear and instant coffee, Dolores Williams knelt beside her bed with arthritic hands folded over a worn Bible. She'd been praying the same prayer for weeks. Lord, send somebody. Send something. My grandbaby's drowning, and I don't know how to throw him a rope. She had no idea that mercy was already putting on its work clothes. Marcus Williams was arrested 10 days later at a bus stop, 6 blocks from his grandmother's apartment. The small black handgun was still in his backpack, wrapped in a towel that smelled like his cousin's cologne and bad decisions. He didn't run when Detective Rodriguez approached. He just sat on the bench, shoulders curved inward like parentheses around his shame, and said, I know why you're here. While Marcus sat in a county jail cell, learning that remorse tastes like metal and instant coffee, Malik Brooks sat at his kitchen table every night after Noelle's homework was finished, after dishes were washed and stories were read, writing the most important document of his life. The victim impact statement grew slowly, sentence by careful sentence, drafted on a laptop that had seen better decades, but still held his words with digital patience. He wrote about fear and process, about the economics of desperation that could drive good people toward terrible choices. He wrote about watching Marcus hesitate at Noelle's unicorn charm, about recognizing humanity in the trembling hand of someone who'd never wanted to be holding a weapon. Dad, accountability matters and harm is real. He typed with 2-finger precision, backspacing and revising until each word carried exactly the weight he intended. But the job of justice isn't to punish a scared kid into the permanent shape of his worst decision. The job of justice is to interrupt the cycle that creates scared kids in the first place. Maya's legal team had warned him about the unusual nature of victims advocating for defendants. It's rare, a senior partner had explained over coffee that cost more than some people's daily wages. Courts expect victims to want maximum punishment. Asking for leniency could backfire. Good, Malik had replied, stirring sugar into courthouse coffee that tasted like compromise and fluorescent lighting. Systems that only work when everyone stays in their expected roles aren't systems worth preserving. When Malik filed the statement requesting diversion over incarceration, the courthouse clerk read it twice before processing the paperwork. By noon, a reporter with connections in the prosecutor's office had the story. Victim asks for leniency ran as the evening news lead, followed by footage of the robbery spliced with Malik's earlier interview about honey mustard and fatherhood. The anchor used phrases like stunning development and unprecedented compassion, while legal experts debated whether mercy was justice or justice was mercy. The story exploded across social media like gasoline meeting flame. Mercy not punishment trended alongside soft on crime. Comment sections became battlefields where strangers fought wars over concepts they'd never had to live with. Forgiveness, accountability, the difference between rehabilitation and revenge. This is what's wrong with America, wrote someone hiding behind an avatar of an eagle wrapped in a flag. Criminals need consequences, not hugs. This father understands that hurt people, replied a profile picture of someone's grandmother holding a baby. Maybe if we tried healing instead of caging, we'd have fewer victims in the first place. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning when Kansas City woke up to the kind of gray sky that made decisions feel heavier than usual. Maya took a personal day from her company, the first unscheduled absence she'd taken in 3 years, to sit in a courthouse pew that had witnessed more broken promises than wedding vows. The courtroom filled with an unlikely congregation. Malik in his best shirt, the blue one Noelle had picked because it matched his eyes. Maya in a simple black suit that didn't announce her net worth. reporters with notebooks ready to capture history, and community activists who'd driven from 3 states because sometimes justice needs witnesses. Marcus sat at the defendant's table, wearing the kind of orange jumpsuit that strips away everything except the essential human underneath. His public defender, a woman named Janet Park who'd learned to fight with words instead of weapons, reviewed her notes with the concentrated attention of someone who understood that young lives hung in the balance of legal arguments. Judge Patricia Morrison had been on the bench for 15 years, long enough to recognize that most cases followed predictable patterns. Prosecutors asked for maximum sentences. Defense attorneys pleaded for minimum consequences. Victims wanted closure. Defendants wanted second chances. The law provided frameworks. Justice tried to find the balance point between too much mercy and too little hope. But nothing about this case followed patterns. The prosecutor presented his argument with the efficiency of someone who'd delivered similar speeches 1,000 times before. Armed robbery, deadly weapon, public safety, deterrent effect. The words landed with statistical precision, each legal precedent stacked like building blocks toward an inevitable conclusion. Janet Park responded with the passion of someone defending her own child, detailing Marcus's background, raised by his grandmother after parental abandonment, 2 part-time jobs that still couldn't cover rent, community college dreams interrupted by economic reality. She painted a portrait of systematic failure that had cornered a decent young man into indecent choices. Both arguments were competent, professional, exactly what legal training had prepared them to deliver. But when Malik's victim impact statement was read aloud, the courtroom atmosphere shifted like air pressure changing before lightning. The words carried weight that legal precedent couldn't measure. Moral authority earned through choosing grace when vengeance would have been easier. Judge Morrison listened with her hand covering her mouth, as if holding back words that wanted to escape. When the reading finished, she looked directly at Malik with eyes that had seen enough human wreckage to recognize something rare when it appeared in her courtroom. "Mr. Brooks," she said, her voice carrying the careful weight of someone about to ask a question that mattered. "Are you sure?" The question hung in the air like incense, heavy with implication. Everyone understood what she was really asking. Are you sure you want mercy for someone who terrorized your child? Are you sure you want rehabilitation for someone who could have killed you? Are you sure you want to spend your moral capital on a stranger's second chance? Malik stood slowly, the way someone rises to accept a responsibility they didn't ask for but can't refuse. "No," he said, his voice carrying across the courtroom with the clarity of church bells on Sunday morning. "But certainty is doing a lot of harm out there." The response was so unexpected, so completely honest, that several people gasped audibly. Lawyers were trained to project confidence, to never admit doubt. But Malik had just acknowledged uncertainty, while simultaneously arguing that uncertainty might be wisdom. "I'm not certain Marcus won't make mistakes," Malik continued. "I'm not certain that programs work better than prison cells. I'm not certain that my daughter is safer if we choose healing over punishment. But I'm absolutely certain that the current system is breaking more people than it's fixing. And I'm certain that someone has to be willing to try a different map." Judge Morrison nodded slowly, recognizing moral courage when it refused to hide behind legal technicalities. 20 minutes later, she granted a diversion program rarely offered in cases involving weapons. Strict conditions, monitored counseling, job training, community service. Marcus would have to earn his way back into society one small choice at a time, but he would get the chance to try. Outside the courthouse, microphones clustered like hungry birds around Malik and Maya. Neither had prepared statements. Neither wanted to claim victory in a situation where everyone had lost something. "I'm not here because I'm brave," Malik said, looking directly into cameras that would broadcast his words to millions of strangers forming opinions about mercy and justice. "I'm here because I have to live with myself. Fear is useful when danger is immediate. It's terrible policy afterward. I don't know what Marcus will do with this opportunity, but I know what cages do to young men who look like my nephew, like kids in my robotics club, like me. If we want different outcomes, we have to try different approaches." Maya stepped forward, adding only what was necessary, because she'd learned that amplifying others' wisdom was sometimes the most powerful thing privilege could do. We solve complex logistics problems for a living. We understand bottlenecks when we see them. Today, we're investing in pathways that allow human beings to flow toward usefulness and repair, instead of cycling endlessly through systems designed for punishment. This man just changed the entire justice system with one act of radical compassion. Have you ever seen anything like this? Hit subscribe if you believe in second chances. The internet response was immediate and divided. Radical compassion competed with victim shaming. Comment sections became digital town squares where America debated the soul of justice. Finally, someone understands that mercy isn't weakness, it's strength, wrote a teacher from Oregon whose students had taught her about second chances. This is exactly why crime rates are skyrocketing. Criminals need consequences, not therapy, replied a retired police officer who'd seen too many victims to believe in rehabilitation. Back and forth, the arguments raged, revealing a country split between those who believed in redemption and those who trusted only in retribution. But in a basement apartment that smelled of arthritis cream and answered prayers, Dolores Williams opened her door to find Malik Brooks standing in the hallway with flowers from the grocery store and eyes full of the kind of gentleness that makes grandmothers cry. "You are who we prayed would come," she whispered, taking his hands in hers with the grip of someone who'd been waiting for mercy to knock. "Years before we knew your name, you are exactly who we asked God to send." The circle was complete. The system had been challenged. And somewhere in the space between punishment and forgiveness, justice was learning to walk a new path. They named it Second Shift, because the language already lived in the communities they wanted to reach, people who worked the job after the job, who fixed their own broken mornings, who took another breath when everyone else had gone home to safety. It would be a workforce pipeline for people coming out of jail or skirting its edges, an on-ramp into logistics and tech support roles that required attention and patience instead of college degrees, paid at rates that told the truth about human dignity. But Malik refused to design programs for people without including the people themselves. The first planning session met in the community center's multi-purpose room on a Saturday morning when most of Kansas City was still deciding between coffee and sleep. Malik had insisted on childcare, coffee that didn't taste like punishment, and a jar where corporate jargon earned a nickel fine. 15 people showed up, some recently released, others still navigating probation, a few family members who'd watched loved ones disappear into the system's machinery. They mapped barriers with the methodical attention most people reserved for tax preparations. Bus routes that didn't connect to shift changes, leaving workers stranded between jobs and transportation. Probation officers who scheduled check-ins without considering work schedules, forcing people to choose between legal compliance and rent money. Background checks that triggered automatic rejections, ending conversations before they could begin. "It's like the system wants us to fail," said Maria, a 34-year-old mother whose possession charge had cost her 3 job opportunities in 6 months. "Not wants us to fail," corrected James, whose forgery conviction had been 5 years ago but followed him like a shadow. "Just doesn't care if we succeed." Maya listened from a folding chair that cost less than her usual business lunches, taking notes on a yellow legal pad instead of her usual tablet. She'd learned that technology could intimidate in spaces where people were already fighting to be heard. They identified needs with the precision of surgeons. Steel-toed boots that cost $70 people didn't have. Anxiety medication that stopped being covered by discount insurance plans. Childcare that operated during second shifts when grandmothers were already asleep. Court dates that couldn't be rescheduled around employment training. Malik suggested solutions with the patience of someone who'd taught robotics to 8-year-olds. A shuttle that ran through neighborhoods headlines usually ignored unless something bled. Microgrants for emergencies like dead car batteries and sick children. Partnerships with legal clinics that understood expungement. A circle of mentors, aunties and pastors and coaches, because sometimes progress looked like someone texting at 6:30 a.m. "You up? You got this." Maya moved money quietly, the way you do when your name creates attention by itself. She didn't speak at ribbon cuttings because there were no ribbons to cut. She didn't give interviews about corporate responsibility because the work was too important for publicity stunts. She sat in the back during training sessions, watching 24-year-olds teach 40-year-olds how to scan inventory codes, feeling something in her chest relax that she hadn't known was tight. Marcus became student number 7 in the first cohort. He arrived every morning 15 minutes early, lunch packed in a reused grocery bag, wearing thrift store clothes that had been washed and pressed with the kind of care that announced serious intentions. He missed 2 days during week 3, a combination of bus breakdown and grandmother's doctor appointment, and returned to find Malik waiting with coffee and the gentle directness of someone who understood that showing up was often the hardest part. "You worried we'd give up on you?" Malik asked, settling into the plastic chair that served as the program's counseling office. Marcus nodded, unable to trust his voice with honesty that raw. "We're not going anywhere," Malik said. "This program doesn't work if we abandon people when life gets complicated. Life's always complicated. The question is whether you want to navigate complicated alone or with backup." By week 5, Marcus was helping newer trainees navigate the computer systems that felt like learning a foreign language designed by robots. He developed a gift for recognizing the particular anxiety that came from being sure everyone could see your failures written on your forehead. "Breathe," he told a 19-year-old named David, whose hands shook every time he touched the keyboard. The word came out in the same tone Malik had used that night in the restaurant: steady, certain, containing multitudes of patience. "Nobody here is judging your speed. We're all learning how to be different than we were yesterday." This is what happens when victims choose healing over hatred. What would your community look like with programs like this? Let me know where you're watching from. At the community center, kids in Malik's robotics club noticed the attention their instructor was getting. News vans appeared occasionally, reporters asking questions about the second shift miracle and the father who forgave his attacker. "You famous now?" asked Jaden, a 10-year-old who'd learned to build circuits before he'd learned to tie his shoes properly. "Notorious," Malik replied with a grin that made the kids laugh. "That's different. Is it true you told the judge to let the robber go?" This from Naomi, who drew dragons like they were family pets and asked questions that made adults uncomfortable. "I told the judge to let him go somewhere he could learn to be better," Malik said, adjusting a motor that had been installed backwards. "That's different too." The conversation that mattered most happened at home, though, when Noelle discovered the uglier comments on social media. A classmate's older sister had shown her the video, the articles, the digital arguments where strangers debated her father's choices with the casual cruelty of people who'd never had guns pointed at their children. She brought the hurt to Malik like a scraped knee requiring attention. "Why are they mad at you, Daddy? You saved us." Malik paused in the middle of folding laundry, a Saturday ritual that had become meditation since Anna died, since his world became him and Noelle figuring things out together. "I saved us that night," he said, matching sock pairs with the methodical care he brought to everything. "But saving is a team sport in the long run." "Team sport," she repeated, tasting the concept like new vocabulary, meaning sometimes you protect people from danger, sometimes you protect them from systems that don't work, sometimes you protect them from giving up on themselves. All of it counts as saving, all of it requires teammates. Graduation day arrived with the kind of December weather that made hot coffee feel like prayer. No ribbons were cut, no politicians gave speeches, just cookies from a grocery store bakery, coffee that had been brewed with actual attention, and 18 people who'd completed a program designed by and for folks who knew what starting over actually required. Dolores Williams sat in the front row wearing her best church dress, the navy blue one with tiny flowers that she'd owned for 15 years, but still made her feel elegant. Watching Marcus receive his certificate, not for completion but for beginning, she cried tears that had been building since the day she'd first held her grandson and promised his absent mother that love would be enough to keep him safe. Maya spoke briefly, not because she was the funder, but because Malik had asked her to share what the program had taught her. We learned that most barriers to employment aren't about capability, she said to the small crowd that had gathered to witness quiet triumph. They're about systems that weren't designed to help people restart their stories. Today we're celebrating 18 people who refused to let their stories end with their worst chapters. Marcus stood when his name was called, crossing a small stage that had been constructed from pallets and plywood. His certificate was printed on regular paper, signed by hand, worth more than any diploma he'd ever imagined earning. He looked out at faces that had become family, other program participants, mentors who'd answered late-night phone calls, Malik and Maya who'd chosen to see potential where most people saw only problems. 6 months ago, he said, voice steady despite hands that still trembled when he was nervous, I thought my story was over. I thought I'd used up all my chances to be anything other than the worst thing I'd ever done. This program didn't just give me job skills, it gave me back my future. In the back, a reporter scribbled notes about rehabilitation and redemption, missing the real story. That healing happens in folding chairs and coffee conversations, in the patient repetition of showing up when showing up feels impossible, in the radical decision to believe that broken doesn't mean worthless. After the ceremony, Marcus approached Malik with the careful formality of someone asking permission to dream. They offered me a supervisor position, he said. Training the next cohort. I wanted to ask if you thought I was ready. Malik considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I think the people you'll be training need someone who remembers what it feels like to be where they are. You ready for that responsibility? Marcus nodded, and in that gesture, the circle completed itself. Student became teacher. Helped became helper. The boy who'd held a gun and shaking hands had become a man who could steady others when their hands shook. Outside, Kansas City continued its ordinary business of living and working and hoping. But in a repurposed community center room where second chances were learning to take root, something beautiful was growing. Proof that systems could be redesigned, that stories could be rewritten, that mercy was not weakness, but the strongest force for change most people would ever encounter. 18 months later, Marcus Williams clocked out of his supervisor shift at Maya's distribution center and drove a used Honda Civic to a furniture store that sold recliners designed for people whose backs had earned comfort through decades of hard work. He'd saved for 3 months. $20 here, $40 there. The same methodical patience his grandmother had taught him when she set aside quarters for school supplies. The chair he chose was burgundy leather, the kind that tilted back far enough for afternoon naps, but firm enough to support morning coffee and evening prayers. The salesman offered financing, but Marcus paid cash. Bills counted twice, earned through inventory management and peer mentoring, clean money that didn't carry the weight of desperation. For my grandmother, he told the delivery driver, whose own grandmother had raised him after circumstances that didn't require explanation. Some stories were universal in communities where love filled gaps that systems left open. Dolores cried when the chair arrived, running her fingers over leather that smelled like new possibilities. You didn't have to, she said, though they both knew he absolutely had to. Not because of debt or obligation, but because gratitude has its own mathematics, and this equation had been building since she'd first prayed for someone to help her drowning grandson. 2 weeks after that, Marcus walked into Riverview Subs during his lunch break. The same door chime announced his arrival, though this time it sang greeting instead of countdown. Eli still worked behind the counter, though he was a manager now, promoted after showing the kind of calm under pressure that employers value once they learn to recognize it. Marcus ordered a turkey sandwich, paid with a $20 bill, and left a $15 tip with a note written on the back of a gas station receipt. Practice. The word carried weight that Eli understood immediately. Practice for believing in second chances, practice for seeing people as more than their worst moments, practice for the kind of grace that transforms strangers into family. Maya's company published a white paper 6 months later, Alternative Pathways in Workforce Development, a longitudinal study. The The title was deliberately boring, designed to slip past corporate defenses through sheer academic dullness. But inside its 43 pages of charts and statistical analysis was proof that rehabilitation worked better than punishment, that investment in people yielded returns measured in reduced recidivism, increased tax revenue, and communities that stopped bleeding their own children to systems designed for disposal. The paper circulated among HR departments and policy wonks without fanfare, the way good information usually travels, quietly, steadily, convincing one spreadsheet at a time. Other companies began calling about partnership models. Other cities requested implementation guides. Change spread the way it always had, through people willing to try something different when the old ways had clearly stopped working. Malik continued living exactly as he always had. Morning coffee while Noel ate cereal, work at the community center where he'd added program coordinator to his business cards, but not to his daily routine. Evening robotics sessions where 10-year-olds learned that most problems could be solved if you understood how the parts were supposed to connect. But recognition found him anyway, the way it does for people who'd rather avoid it. "You're that guy," a woman said in the grocery store checkout line, her voice carrying the careful excitement of someone recognizing local news. The father who helped the young man get a program instead of prison. Malik nodded politely, focused on unloading his cart with the efficiency of someone who'd mastered single-parent shopping logistics. Frozen vegetables, pasta sauce, the particular brand of yogurt Noel would actually eat. "My cousin says you're too soft," the woman continued, apparently determined to have this conversation in aisle 7. "Says real men don't let criminals walk free." Malik paused, considering his response while the checkout scanner beeped its electronic rhythm. "Lots of definitions of real man floating around," he finally said, meeting her eyes with the same steady attention he'd given everyone that night in the restaurant. "I choose the one that fits. Protecting children, building community, showing them how to solve problems without making more problems. Seems to be working so far." The woman nodded slowly, perhaps recognizing wisdom that couldn't be argued with because it was living proof of its own effectiveness. The conversation that mattered most, though, happened on a Saturday morning when Malik stood on the sidelines of a soccer field, watching Noel chase a ball with 9 other 8-year-olds who'd discovered that running in groups was the most fun a weekend could contain. Her team wore purple jerseys, her choice, obviously, and played with the fearless enthusiasm of children who hadn't yet learned that some games had stakes beyond juice boxes and high fives. Noel intercepted a pass near midfield, dribbled past 2 defenders with the unexpected grace of someone who'd been practicing footwork in their backyard, and scored with a shot that surprised everyone, including herself. She turned toward the sidelines, grinning like she'd solved geometry instead of finding the corner of a goal, and shouted the words that had become their family motto. "Team sport." "Always," Malik called back, meaning it for soccer and robotics and rehabilitation programs and the 1,000 small choices that held families together when circumstances tried to pull them apart. After the game, they shared a celebration lunch at the same restaurant where their story had begun. Different booth, same menu, same door chime that had once marked the beginning of the worst night of their lives. But trauma, Malik had learned, didn't have to be a life sentence. Sometimes the worst places could become the safest ones if you were willing to rewrite their meanings, from one moment of terror to a lifetime of healing. That's the power of choosing love over fear. What moment in your life could you transform with radical compassion? Noelle dipped her chicken nuggets in honey mustard, the condiment she'd always preferred but had been too polite to request until her father taught her that preferences deserved respect, and asked the question that had been building for months. "Daddy, do you think Marcus is happy now?" Malik considered this with the seriousness her questions always deserved. "I think he's learning to be happy, same as all of us." "Good," she said, apparently satisfied with this philosophical framework. "I like it when people learn things." Outside, Kansas City continued its ordinary business of living and healing and hoping. But inside a restaurant booth where 2 people had learned that survival was a collaborative art, father and daughter shared lunch, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that mercy was not weakness, but the strongest force for change most people would ever encounter. The ripples continued spreading, not through headlines or social media campaigns, but through one conversation, one chance, one choice at a time. The way real change always worked, slowly, steadily, changing the world by changing how people treated each other when no one was watching. That evening, while Noel practiced math homework that was getting harder than third grade used to be, Malik received a text from Marcus. "Grandmother says to tell you thank you for the 1,000th time, and to ask if Noel needs a robotics assistant. I'm getting pretty good with circuits." The circle expanded again, the way it always would. As long as people were willing to choose connection over separation, healing over harm, hope over the easier option of giving up on each other. 3 years later, the security footage still circulates on social media with the persistence of truth that refuses to fade. Remember when that father stayed calm during a robbery and changed everything? People share it during election seasons, after mass shootings, whenever the news cycle makes them hungry for proof that humans can choose grace under pressure. The video always begins the same way. Black and white footage of ordinary people eating ordinary dinners until extraordinarily wrong interrupts their evening. But now, viewers know the rest of the story. They know about second shift programs expanding to 12 cities. They know about recidivism rates dropping in communities willing to invest in pathways instead of just punishment. They know about a young man who supervises other young men, learning that mistakes don't have to become identities. In the robotics room at Northside Community Center, a small plaque hangs beside the tool cabinet where Malik keeps spare batteries and circuit boards donated by parents who understand that education happens in many forms. The plaque reads, "Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Military wisdom adapted for 8-year-olds learning to program robots," though everyone who reads it knows it applies to much more than electronics. "What's that mean?" new kids ask when they join the program, pointing at words that seem important enough to deserve their own space on the wall. "Means panic makes everything harder," Malik explains, while helping small fingers connect wires that carry information instead of electricity. "Means if you want to go fast, you start by going steady." Means the smoothest path between 2 points usually isn't a straight line. The kids nod with the seriousness children bring to concepts they can feel but can't yet fully explain, then return to their robots with the patient focus of scientists discovering that creation requires both precision and forgiveness. When people ask Malik to speak at conferences about criminal justice reform, invitations that arrive monthly from organizations impressed by measurable outcomes, he usually declines. But when he does accept, he always begins with the same definition. Shock, he tells audiences of policymakers and professors, is voltage a system wasn't designed to handle. Sometimes shock damages the circuits. Sometimes it forces a reboot. Sometimes it rewires the whole network to work differently than it did before. He pauses, letting the metaphor settle in rooms full of people who make decisions about other people's lives. If justice means maps instead of cages, maybe that night gave our system the kind of productive shock that helps it function the way it was supposed to all along. Maya's company now partners with 43 community organizations across 8 states, each program designed by people who understand barriers from the inside because they've lived them. The white papers multiply. Boring titles hiding revolutionary data about what happens when communities invest in healing instead of punishment. Other CEOs call asking for consultation. Other cities request implementation guides. Change spreads the way it always has, through people willing to risk trying something different when the old ways have clearly stopped working. But the change that matters most happens in individual moments, in choices made by people whose names will never trend on social media. It happens when judges pause before sentencing, remembering that mercy is not weakness, but the strength to interrupt cycles that create more victims. It happens when CEOs listen to voices they've never heard in boardrooms, learning that good business sometimes means investing in solutions that can't be measured in quarterly profits. It happens when grandmothers pray for strangers' children, understanding that healing is infrastructure that holds communities together. On a Saturday morning that feels like every other Saturday morning, Malik stands on the sidelines of a soccer field, watching Noelle chase possibilities across grass that doesn't care about headlines or viral videos. She's grown 3 inches since that night at the restaurant, learned division, developed opinions about music that make him feel older than his years. But she still runs toward him after every game with the breathless joy of someone announcing discoveries. "We won!" she shouts, grass stains decorating her purple jersey like badges of effort. "Jamie scored twice, but I made the pass that set up the winning goal." "Team sport," she announces, the phrase that has become their family shorthand for everything that matters. "Always," Malik responds, thinking about maps and mercy, about judges who risk career advancement to choose rehabilitation, about CEOs who listen to communities they've never lived in, about grandmothers whose prayers become infrastructure that holds broken systems together until better ones can be built. Later, they celebrate at Riverview Subs, not because the sandwiches are exceptional, but because some places earn the right to be claimed as safe through the simple act of returning. The door chime still sounds like mercy when it announces their arrival, though now it also sounds like hope, like healing, like the quiet revolution that happens when people choose connection over separation, understanding over judgment, teamwork over the easier option of going it alone. This father didn't just save lives that night. He changed how we think about justice, mercy, and what it means to be strong. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and let me know, what's one thing you'll do differently after hearing this? I'm reading every single comment because your voice matters in building the world we want to see. The revolution continues, one choice at a time, as quiet and persistent as love itself.